Hello and welcome to week 3 of the 2790 series. Our Going Deeper today is going to focus on the temptation scene for Jesus Christ. And so the first question that we have is there any difference between Luke and Matthew and Mark as they present this temptation scene? And quite honestly, between Luke and Matthew, very little difference. The order is a little bit different, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2. The first temptation, second, and the third, and the first temptation, and then that would be the third for Matthew is the second in Luke. Very little difference, and even the language is almost identical as they go through. It almost seems as if they're working and collaborating together from the same source, which of course is entirely possible. But the temptations, 3 in form, are very common to humanity, and it's important for us first to look at what are those temptations and what do they represent for us? And then how does Jesus deal with them? How can you and I deal with the temptations of life? And so there are 3 basic temptations. The first, to turn stones into bread, that's the temptation of the body. The idea that we get hungry, we get thirsty, we have physical needs and physical wants and desires in our life, and they can be used against us by the devil in order to get us off track and off base. The second is the temptation of ego. Give you these kingdoms and they'll all be yours, and you get to be in control of things that you don't really need to worry about being in control of them. And plus, Jesus is in control of them anyway, and they're not Satan's to give away. But there's this temptation that to elevate ourselves above our place in the universe and to think we're more important than we are. And that's a pretty common temptation to all. And then the third temptation, throw yourself down, is a temptation of purpose. Why are you here? Are you here to make a grand entrance into Jerusalem and have everybody go, "Oh, look at this, he's floating down and the angels have him"? And no, the Messiahship that Jesus came for is much more subtle than that. It's not a ministry of miracles. It's a ministry of the cross. And so the purpose kind of overrides this temptation to do things to glorify self rather than God. And so it's a temptation to have your purpose something other than what you were created to do. And so those are 3 temptations that are pretty common to all of us: the temptation of the body, the temptation of the psyche, and the temptation of the will, trying to get us off track. What's important for us to see is how temptation works and what Jesus does with it. In each of these instances, Satan uses deception in order to try to trick Jesus into doing something that's not according to God's plan. That's the same for you and for me. It's always a deception. And for us, it takes the form of things like, oh, nobody will see you. You're not going to hurt anybody. Maybe next time you can do this, you don't have to do it now. You're really busy. And there's lots and lots of temptations of body, mind, and spirit that get us into a place where we justify a behavior that's almost godly or a little bit godly, something that's good, and we sacrifice what's best for what's good. And that's a very, very common temptation that Christians face. And it's important for us to see, how does Jesus deal with these temptations? They're so subtle and yet so powerful in our lives. The first thing that we learn is Jesus really knows his Bible. He knows the Old Testament really, really well. And of course, the deceiver knows that too. And so the deceiver actually uses the scriptures of the Old Testament to tempt Jesus to be ungodly, which is a very captivating methodology. And so Jesus' response is, he responds to the misuse of the Old Testament text by the proper understanding of a different text. Jesus understands the intention of the scriptures, what they're intended to accomplish in a person's life. Satan understands the power of a scripture to get us off base. And so if we can do what Jesus does at each one of these 3 temptations, he goes back to a different text of the Old Testament and talks about the intention of the text. And that's what we have to get into. It's our understanding of the scriptures is not let me memorize this so I know the words. Let me, Lord, understand the intention you have for me as I am examining for truth and reading your scriptures. I want to know you and your intention in the text. And then we will be empowered to remember the right text and the intention behind it when we get tempted. And so that's a methodology that's really, really important for us to understand as we seek lives of holiness.